put this on somewhere.
Free content.
Yes.
The real reason why I'm here to talk about vulnerability. That was a joke for anyone that didn't.
So if this goes that way.
Love you. Cool. And it's styling, which is the main thing. This is really cool. We're all sitting in what is really like a sauna right now, gathered in the name of health, and I've been invited to come and talk about love. Can we just really take a minute to just look at the way the world is progressing, truly? Like, truly, we're sitting in a sauna about to eat bone broth and do ice baths, and the guest speaker, and you're wearing a HEALY, and the guest speaker is talking about love and mobilizing 4% of the global population in a love movement, and you're all here with an open heart willing to do that. And Zach's biggest wish, when I said, you know, what do you want me to talk about tonight? He said, I just want everyone to go home with a new friend. And I sort of feel like if this is your level of willingness right now, it's really inevitable, Zach, so you have nothing to worry about. And if you really are struggling, ask someone to go and do a ice bath with you, because that bonding experience will pretty much consolidate a lifelong friendship, especially if you've never done one before. Help each other relax the nervous system, which is actually a beautiful segue to share some of my message to the world, which is how do we start to become aware of the ever-present choice that we have in every single moment to either choose love or to choose fear. And when you boil everything back to its binary nature, that's the choice we're always making. We're either leaning in and we're choosing expansion and we're choosing connection, or we're leaning out and we're choosing fear, avoidance, withdrawal, isolation. And the reason I liken that to an ice bath is when you get in really cold water, hands up who remembers the first time you ever did an ice bath? What's the first thing you want to do as soon as you get in the water? Get the fuck out of the ice bath. Right? And what makes you practice at being able to do an ice bath and reap its benefits is being able to what? Surrender. Remain in the ice bath, hopefully. I don't know if that's what you guys do in an ice bath. That's what I try and do in an ice bath. Stay in the ice bath for at least a couple of minutes, right? But it's asking you, the cold water is asking you to surrender to it. And it is really a beautiful metaphor, because what's happening physiologically in your body is, what are you training your nervous system to do in an ice bath?
Cope with stress.
Cope with stress, yeah. Start to actually activate the parasympathetic nervous system so that you can start to be comfortable in the discomfort. Now, who can recall a situation, even just today, where you felt insecure, awkward, or uncomfortable? Really? Only 3 of you? I don't believe you. Now, in that moment, right, the practice of love, the message that I started to become acutely aware of after working with many people, like hundreds of thousands of people in the field of mental health across tens of countries all over the world, was that we all share something very, very profound in common, and that's that we all are human. We have a humanity that is reaching out in all moments, wanting connection. And when you're not training yourself, literally training yourself to know how to lean into that discomfort, then it's really hard to actually create meaningful connections. And some of you may have experienced that in your own life. And so love is like an actionable skill set, without making it sound like too clinical, because I'm also a massive romantic. But love really is an actionable skill set. The more you familiarize yourself with the state, the more you become comfortable in the discomfort of the vulnerability that love requires. And that might mean tonight meeting a new person, having a conversation that is more than just how much it's been raining the past week. You know, leading with something more meaningful and actually going to the place that's uncomfortable. And your brain, you know, your ego mind, the logic part of you, it's going to be telling you to not share these things about yourself. It's going to be saying, don't ask that question. Don't go up to the pretty girl or the hot guy. Don't do that thing. You're being awkward, you're being weird. And this is the voice of fear. Because what's the objective of the ego? sustain your comfort zone, right? And we actually need to stop like wanting to kill the ego, and we need to actually just appreciate it for what it is, because the ego is there to keep us safe. Because once upon a time, what was the ego doing?
Protecting.
More than protecting, it was actually keeping us alive, right? And in modern day context, we don't have many like woolly mammoths and saber-toothed tigers hunting us down every single moment of every single day. But you're on a neurological level, your brain is reading, like asking that pretty girl or that hot guy, it's reading it as potential death. So how willing are you to actually lean into that and start to open yourself up to the vulnerability? So my challenge tonight to all of you guys is, what is the thing you least want to say to your new friends? What is the thing that you're most ashamed of? What is the thing that in most of your relationships, maybe to date, you've been like, this is the thing that I want people to know the least about me? And if we started creating a world that was safe enough to share these aspects of ourselves, just so quickly we would reach the 350 million people. Because love is so contagious. It's not about adding anything. It's actually just about remembering what we are. And it is what we are. Love is what we are. It's our natural baseline. It's our natural state. After working in mental health for 5 years, I started my nonprofit when I was 18 after a lived experience with anorexia. And I went through the clinical health system, and I learned a lot about how to not help people heal, to say the least. You know, when you're constantly put in an environment where you're forced to focus on the identity that's causing you to suffer, it's very, very difficult to break up with that identity and recreate yourself. And what I started to learn and what I started to understand was how we actually need spaces where we're okay to come as we are, to not feel like we have to change. And in that acceptance and that acknowledgement, the ability to truly be present with one another, guess what happens? We start to become better and better versions of ourselves naturally, without forcing change, without having to be, you know, aggressive about our development. It becomes a natural thing. When we have that connection and we feel seen and we feel enough, we become more of that. We become the best version of ourselves through that. And working in this nonprofit, it was so simple, the models that we were implementing. We would go into schools, into universities, into workplaces, and the objective was literally to have no objective, just to create a space. That was literally what we would do. We just create a space where people could share if they wanted to share. We shared our stories. My team, which was 4 of us at the time, would share our journey through mental health and through the pains we had experienced, and also the joys and the triumphs. And we would invite people to share. And what we started to see were profound results. Like schools that had a 15% attendance rate after 6 months of creating these spaces had like 70, 80% attendance. And these were communities that the government had spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on trying to intervene with and fix, which is the problem, right? And imposing their view of what they think should happen in order to fix the problem. And after 5 years, or not even 5 years, 3 or 4 years, the government became very interested in what we were doing. So like, how are you creating these results? And at 21, I got asked to become the youngest National Mental Health Commissioner in the Commonwealth's history, which is pretty radical to go from, I was living in my van prior to that, to getting flown first class, escorted onto planes, being called Commissioner Gibson. Highly hilarious, very, very hilarious. But what I got to see, right, I was one of 6 advisors that was working with the Health Minister and the Prime Minister, because mental health at that time was under the PM's portfolio, and then it got moved to health after about 18 months. I was advising almost a $40 billion budget. So people think that we don't have money that's being invested into health and mental health. We do. And back then we did. But 97% of that budget was being spent in crisis intervention. And the reason I'm sharing this is because that is a macro manifestation of what so many of us are doing in the micro, which is waiting for problems to get so bad, waiting for our health to get so bad, waiting for our levels of disconnection and addiction and mental illness to get so bad before we intervene, when we have that last 3% reserve. And it inspired me so much through that time to just get really curious about what the true problem was. Because it was costing us $0 to get better results than the government that was spending $40 billion annually with no return. Actually, the mental health rates were going up every single year and still are statistically. And the answer is so simple. The answer is love. So if hearing and seeing each other, which is at the root of all of it, the core of all of it, is really the solution, why are we not doing that? And this is the part of this discussion that I want to open up to a conversation. If the answer really is this simple, why are we not doing that in our own lives? Why are we not leading with love? Why are we not choosing love? What is getting in the way? There's so much I can offer in the next 20 minutes, and I want to actually, Zach's asked me to do a bit of a facilitation and a process. I'd love to make it responsive to you guys. What gets in your way of being able to lean in and truly be present with other people? And why don't we open up a conversation about that? Because sharing that vulnerability in the space right now will guarantee that everyone leaves with a friend. I promise you. Who wants to be the brave sacrificial?
Yeah, my biggest thing is I had was diagnosed with ADHD as a kid, and I used to say some pretty random stuff that people were like, whoa. So every time I'm with someone else, I feel really afraid that I'm not going to be good enough to be next to that person. I feel so belittled under that person. And it's like, personal development's helped me, but like, I'm like terrified when I see like a girl or a guy and they're being successful. Like, I just do not feel comfortable at all. Like, I don't feel like I'm worth their time and stuff.
Okay, first question to the group is hands up who's, by the way, thank you for sharing that. And my second question is going to be, how did it feel to actually share that? But my first question is, hands up those of you who relate to that share. And I just want you to just fully see that, and for everyone in the room to see that 90% of hands are up. And how many of us go around in our lives thinking, I'm the only person that feels this way? And we convince ourselves, like black and blue, because the brain wants to be so right. No matter what you tell the brain, it wants to be right. It's going to do everything it can to perceive your environment in a validation of itself. Does that make sense? So if you say, I'm the only one that feels like this, guess what your brain's looking for evidence to justify? That belief. And it's going to perceive situations that might not even be there just to prove itself right. It's very interesting when you start to understand the nature of the brain. But in sharing that vulnerability just then, how did you feel?
At the time I knew it was right, but as I've noticed everyone sort of looking at me, I noticed the tension in my heart built up more and it became a lot heavier. I'm like, shit, am I saying the right thing? Doing this right? Yeah. It was interesting.
And now?
Oh, now that I understand that everyone goes through it, I don't know, it's how I feel right now. Like, I still feel nervous that everyone's looking at me and stuff, but it's just the pain that I'm willing to accept because it's worth sharing.
Yes. Amazing. And do you feel more expansive in your body from that feeling when you first started seeing everyone looking at you?
Yeah, I definitely feel like it's more, I feel a lot lighter.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
Definitely feel, I'm just happy to share something if it helps someone. It's as simple as that.
Beautiful.
Yep.
If it helps someone, that's all that matters.
Who did that help, that share? Who's that? Yeah. With that. So this practice, right, of sharing our vulnerabilities, it's when you're on the edge, like if this is the sharing of the vulnerability, the bungee jump that you have to take, you know, in order to make that choice into love. When you're on this side of the jump, this is actually where the fear exists. As soon as you take the jump, all of a sudden you become lighter and more expansive. And I really want this to land for you guys, because what is your brain telling you when you're on this side of the jump?
Can't do it.
You can't do it, don't do it. What is your brain telling you the scariest part is?
Doing it.
Doing it. What happens as soon as you do it?
Yeah.
You literally alleviate yourself. I've witnessed in Love Out Loud, we run retreats, trainings, like super deep, vulnerable spaces. When you come to retreat, like we go deep, really deep. And part of the humblingness, you know, the part that humbles me the most about doing this work is seeing people in their humanity. And I've seen 75 to 80-year-olds who have come to retreat realize, doing this deep work, that they've spent their whole life on this side of the jump, believing, truly believing that they were saving themselves from the scariest bit. And I don't wish that for anyone. Because as soon as you take that jump, as soon as you choose that vulnerability, you start to open up. Suffering can literally only exist in silence. Insecurity can literally only exist in silence. Imagine how it would be if you went up to someone and said, I'm really insecure about my nose. What would happen in that moment? Right? Exactly what is happening right now. People would laugh, people would express, it would actually lift immediately. But what happens when you don't name it? What's happening internally?
Bubbles. Stories.
The stories, and what starts to happen energetically in the space.
Negative energy.
Yeah, it's negative, it's tension. And how's the other person? If the other person's insecure, which is so many interactions in the world, when the other person's insecure, what are they going to start telling themselves?
They don't like me.
It's me.
Yeah, it's me. It's me. It's definitely me, and that person hates me, and I've done something. They're probably looking at my nose, right? And because no one is being honest and vulnerable, everyone leaves feeling confused, in total angst and self-doubt. And there was such a profound opportunity in that moment for them to actually deepen the connection by naming the vulnerability. This is an actionable skill that we can learn. And guess what happens the more you do this?
Yeah, but what if you say stuff and then the other people walk away and never want to see you again?
So what does that say about them? This is an awesome question. Yeah.
Great question.
So why would someone do that?
So an insecurity that they have.
Because they're scared. It's an insecurity that they have. So going back to what I was saying about presence, right? When someone is not able to be present in themselves with that vulnerability, and you're showing up with a willingness to be vulnerable, what are you representing to them? It's threat. You're representing a threat, and it has nothing to do with you. And I know this really deeply, sister. When I was anorexic for 5 years. I was always the elephant in the room.
I was too. Yeah.
So I feel you, and I know, and I speak these words because healing for me was me leaning into the understanding that my head at that time was telling me that people were treating me that way because they didn't care, or they couldn't see me, or they hated me, or because the world was going to be better off if I wasn't in it. These were the things that my head was saying to me. Yeah. And the more I started to heal and trust that my vulnerability did have value, the more I started to see the only way they could keep themselves safe was through avoiding me, because they did not know how to be present with what I represented to them. And the more deeply connected I became to that being the truth, the more powerful I became. And we all have this power. There's such a power in your vulnerability, in you sharing even what you just shared. There's such a power in all of our vulnerability. We don't realize until we actually go there. We actually allow ourselves to go there. We actually allow ourselves to be rejected. We allow ourselves to be judged, because guess what happens when you put yourself out on that limb and someone walks away and never wants to speak to you again? Guess what's happening in their head? All of that stuff comes up for them. And that's awareness. You've actually been an invitation to their own awareness, and they won't stop thinking about you. Because the path for all of us is to resolve ourselves. You know, every soul wants to be resolved, wants to be whole, wants to come back to a place of compassion and love. And it's crazy to me that people can go decades and decades still in blame, still in projection, still in hatred, still in judgment. But I promise you, eventually, even if it's on their deathbed, they're going to have to reconcile with themselves at some point and understand that every time you point a trigger, there's 3 pointing back at you, truly. So when you have the bravery to share that vulnerability, you're highlighting awareness for people. I have a lot of people that don't like me. I have a lot of people that say all sorts of crazy shit about what I'm doing. Like, you'd have to 100% be a narcissist to start a love movement. I've been told that on the reg. I'm like, that makes absolutely no sense, but okay, like, sure. So, but you know what that says to me about them? That if you were leading this love movement and you had this much power in your vulnerability, you would be being narcissistic.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're judging my position against how you would be, you know? And that's what we're always doing. So it gives me a lot of insight. Every time someone judges me in that way, I'm like, cool, you just saved me like 6 months of figuring it out about you in covert ways you've just told me in one sentence. Because what someone's perceiving in you is a total mirror of themselves. This is the other great thing about love. When you start seeing with love, you're like, oh my God, like there's so much beauty everywhere. Life becomes so beautiful. Like truly these cliches of like beauty's not skin deep. And we've kind of heard that so many times that it started to wear in its meaningfulness. But truly, like beauty, what it means to be beautiful, everyone is beautiful. Not everyone is wearing their beauty, you know, and is actually loving out loud. Sometimes it's locked away and it's shrouded in defenses and aggression or violence or insecurity, whatever it is. But underneath that, in all of us, there's a soul that has so much beauty. And actually, just on that, maybe the last point that I'll make is something I was writing about recently that I want to start speaking more on because I'm passionate about it. Are there any Brene Brown fans in the room? Yeah, cool. So I love Brene's work, obviously, because she started to promote the power of vulnerability. But I think within this like escalation of awareness around vulnerability, what's kind of been missed is vulnerability has almost been marketed to look a particular way. It's like if you go to circles and you cry and you put your hand on your heart and look in people's eyes for a really long time and breathe deeply, you know. And unless you do this, you're not vulnerable. And the reason I have an issue with that, because that they are all acts of very beautiful versions of vulnerability. But one thing I want people to be aware of when it comes to connecting and leaning in and choosing love and being vulnerable is often when someone is in their defenses, that's when they're most vulnerable. But we're not trained to see defense like that. If someone's being defensive, you know, or belittling, putting you down, being, I don't know, what are some other manifestations of that? You know what I mean? Needing to assert themselves to feel more powerful, making other people lesser, whatever that is. If someone's doing that, when we aren't whole and complete and centered in ourselves, we're going to take it personally. We're going to take it on. We're going to make it mean something about us. But when you find that center and that power in you and enough self-love to realize that it's actually not about me, what this other person is doing, all of a sudden you have an insight to just how vulnerable these people are who need to do that. And when you can hold them in that, it's like rather than needing to be forceful, if you actually just soften in the presence of someone that's being aggressive or whatever the manifestation is, they're then actually needing to be, they have to feel their emotions. When you're not giving them ammo, you know, and you actually resolve the conflict in the situation, they're left with themselves. And that's really how you break people, you know, how you allow people to surrender the fears and the defenses when there's nothing to go up against. Your nervous system, if you've only ever been met with attack, when you've been defensive, your nervous system is anticipating that. So I'm going to defend and I'm just waiting now to be attacked back. So when you don't meet that expectation, all of a sudden their pattern breaks. And when their pattern breaks and they have nothing, no ammo, all of their emotions actually start to rise to the surface, their true emotion. Not just what they've had to put around their emotions to keep themselves safe. So can you guys think about people in your life that maybe present like this? Cool, that's my second challenge as you leave the event tonight, is Okay, we'll really go deep in this challenge. If this person is within a conversation's distance, so whether that's a message or a physical conversation that you can have with this person, I want you to try something. I want you to approach them, and I want you to acknowledge something you truly see in them. You can try and make it as natural as possible, because it might seem a bit out of the blue or weird to go up and like really deeply acknowledge someone that you've never had a nice conversation with. You can try and make it as natural as possible. Like, hey, I really noticed when you did X, Y, and Z the other day, and I just wanted you to know that I really saw you in that. And just watch their pattern break. Yeah, because this is how love heals. That love shouldn't just be this conditional thing that when someone shows up the way I want them to, then that's when they're worthy of my love. Love is the practice of, even when someone's not showing up the way I want them to, how deep is my capacity to choose love in this moment? And it's not that you're going to be able to every single time, but at least see that as the invitation to, this is insight for me. This is where I can grow. This is where I can deepen. And the reward is pretty profound. Like the way that Love Out Loud grows is a direct result of my own integrity to love. The more I love, someone asked me this when I toured last. They were like, how do you have so many people that love you? And I literally said, someone asked me that when I was on stage. And I was like, because I fucking love so hard. I love so hard, and it's returned to me. I try my hardest to love everyone in every single moment. And as a result, it's returned to you so abundantly. So that's the sentiment I want to leave with you guys tonight. Thank you so much. If you have any questions about Love Out Loud, please feel free to come and ask me. And thank you to Zach for creating this, and for Brendan for creating this beautiful space, and Lizzie for being such an incredible human being, supporter, and to all of you amazing people.